Let's bring in Peter Zalmayev, the director at the Eurasia Democracy Initiative, joining us live from Kyiv. Peter, good morning to you. 6 months since the invasion began. We also know Russia planning to step up their strikes on civilian and government infrastructure. What's Ukraine's latest position militarily on the ground, and how much longer can they continue to hold up their fight?
Well, that is actually an indication of its, the state of its army on the ground. The fact that Russia is threatening or hinting at a barrage of new barrage of rocket attacks against largely civilian objects means that it's pretty impotent on the battlefield. This is not to, underestimate the remaining, arsenal of the Russian fighting forces. It still outnumbers and outguns the Ukrainian army. But at the same time, there's a certain stalemate. We're seeing that the front line in the east of Ukraine is not really moving. It's pretty much at a stalemate. And in Kherson, the Russians are bogged down. They've been cut off. The bridges have been destroyed, so they're in isolation. It seems that this is Vladimir Putin is banking on a war of attrition simply because the cost of any new advances, territorial advances in Ukraine is just way too high, and his army is exhausted. So he's counting on, trying to bring Ukraine to its knees with strikes on civilian objects, and once again continuing its economical and gas blackmail of Ukraine's Western allies.
It's been noted that the moral pressure on Russia has been rising. But where is that pressure on Russia other than sanctions? They seem to believe their cause is still worth the fight. So what kind of moral pressure can the West and other allies like NATO for Ukraine, what other types of moral pressure can they really put on the Kremlin?
The Kremlin and its leader, Vladimir Putin, does not understand the language of moral pressure. That's as simple as that. If you remember, in the early days of wars, million people marches around Europe, in Berlin, in France, around the world, in Tel Aviv. None of that worked. Russia has been subjected to a kind of unprecedented ostracism that it has probably never faced in its history. Added to that have been economic sanctions. Europe is considering a ban on tourist visas for Russian citizens. None of that has worked. Vladimir Putin is obsessed with Ukraine. He is probably a genuine believer that, an independent and liberal democratic Ukraine is an existential threat to the survival of Russia as he sees it. And the rest of the population is simply cowering in abject fear of Vladimir Putin, who has imposed a complete informational blockade on Russia, where the majority of Russians simply do not receive or refuse to see or close their eyes to the reality of what Russia is doing to its neighboring country.
Peter Zalmayev, the director at the Eurasia Democracy Initiative, joining us this morning. Thank you so much.